Hi, my name is Reed Silverne. The name of the show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker, proud of it. Thank you for watching the show. I've been talking, last week I talked about the potential for a Great Depression scenario, not a Great Depression, but a Great Depression scenario, and whether the struggles that the Federal Reserve is having, all the things that they're doing, is to prevent a Great Depression type scenario. But before I go any further, I'm going to tune in and I'm going to give Annie Mae a call over here, see if she's available, and she is.
Hi, it's Annie Mae. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Annie Mae.
I heard you were sick last week.
Yeah, I had some kind of an allergy attack.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm a little better.
I'm glad you did your show. It was good.
Thanks.
Showed a little character.
Well, thank you.
That's great.
Okay.
Well, what's your show about tonight? Oh, that should appeal to the accountant demographic.
Well, my show is, as I said before, it's about derivatives, it's about CDOs, it's about the crisis and whether we're in a Great Depression scenario or whether it can be prevented. And yes, it does play to the accountant.
50-year-old accountant.
Yeah.
Is that the demographic that you want to appeal to?
Well, everybody wants to appeal to the youth, but I'm not sure I'm going to qualify for that.
Is that your audience?
I don't know.
You're going to have to decide.
Yeah, I'll do my best.
Well, give us a call.
All right.
Ta-ta.
Bye.
Let's do lunch.
Yeah.
See you later.
Okay.
Bye.
All right. That's Annie Mae, and she sounds like she has a little bit of problem with all these technical subjects that I have a tendency to talk about. And I think they're important. I don't know if my viewerage does or if my viewerage is 50-year-old accountants. I happen to be mid-50s, and I was a cost accountant, even though I'm not an accountant per se. So what is the story? I talked about last week what happened in the Great Depression. And what happened in the Great Depression, and I'm going to put probably something that's in a stack of books this big with 100 different theories into a nutshell of about 5 minutes, but let's see if I can do it. Basically, it started in 1929 with a stock collapse. Stocks kept on going down and down. Investors started jumping out of windows. And that's what people think about when they think about the Great Depression. But that's not really what caused the Great Depression. The following year, there was a bank in the Bronx called the Bank of the United States that had a run on its assets, which means that the depositors all showed up on the basis of a rumor and said, we want our money now, and we got to get our money right this minute. And this is a situation that affected the entire world's economy. In fact, I'm going to put my cursor over here around the Bronx. And however, we're just talking about $2 million on that particular day. There was a riot in front of the bank. The bank was closed. The bank went to the clearinghouse. Clearinghouse handles all transactions during the day and makes sure that there's money backing up the deposits, the checks, and so on and so forth. And they asked for a refreshment of their liquidity so that they had the cash to be able to hand out in order to handle the run on the bank. Well, the clearinghouse turned them down. The bank collapsed, the Bank of the United States. It just happened that that particular bank, even though it was one of the largest depositor banks in the country at that time, had the same name as what had been the Federal Reserve from 1789 until 1836, when Andrew Jackson got rid of it, the Bank of the United States had been the central bank of the United States. And a lot of people throughout the world thought that the central bank of the United States was collapsing. Within a few months, Kreditstadt Anstalt, the largest bank in Austria, let me find Austria over here. Austria collapsed. Then that they couldn't pay their obligations. That caused banks in France and Germany to collapse, Russia, and the rest is history. Basically, what happened was there was no liquidity, which means that there was no actual cash money to be able to handle the transactions that the modern economy required. As banks shut down, they were unable to loan. There was less credit around. Since there's less credit, people who were owed money demanded that money in cash. Those people couldn't find cash to pay, and companies started to go out of business, pop, 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 one after another. So what was done? Well, there was a bank holiday in 1933 that was run by the New Deal, which was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Democratic Party. Just took over the government in they were elected in 32 and they went into power in 33. They closed down all the banks in the United States for a long weekend, inspected them, and opened up only 2/3. So they basically closed 1/3 of the banks that weren't already closed in the entire country. And then they thought of different ways to bring cash back into the economy, mostly through I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it was the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, that built Hoover Dam and most of the national parks, basically pumping a lot of money into public works. And there were a number of other ways that were done to get money to the public, including Social Security and other things. So that's basically what started the Get Well plan, I guess you might say, to reflate the economy. Now, before that collapse, there was a collapse in commodities prices, so that farmers really couldn't sell their crops at a price that would keep them open. That's actually started before the great stock crash in 1926. So by the mid-30s, basically people were starving in the cities, and farmers were throwing milk away because they couldn't sell it at a price that kept them in business. Foreclosures were everywhere. The price of land and value went down, so on and so forth. How does that relate to today? Well, today is kind of the same and kind of the opposite. How is it the same? Well, our particular recession started with a collapse in land values, where land values are going below the level that loans that were loaned against it. However, all the other commodities are extremely high. Oil is at $100 a barrel. Gold went above $1,000 a barrel to about $1,010 in one day. And rice, corn, you name it, are all sky high. What's the basis of that? Well, that is what I'm going to talk about today. Why are commodities high while land prices are going down? Well, let me say that some of the other things that were done to prevent the next Great Depression were guaranteeing deposits, so there wouldn't be run on the banks. So deposits are guaranteed by the FDIC, federal agency, up to $100,000. They also created the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, so that stocks would have to have value. And companies would have to actually produce public balance sheets and so on and so forth, so that people could see whether the investments they were getting into had any value at all. That was all fine and dandy until the 80s and the 90s. And the reason the 80s and the 90s changed everything is because there were some new kinds of transactions that created value and that basically acted as securities or acted as if they were stocks, but weren't. And a number of these are called derivatives. So what the heck are derivatives? Well, there's about 10 people in the entire country that know what derivatives really are. I've been studying it for the last week, and I have to admit I'm almost as confused as when I went into it. I actually pulled some the Wikipedias. I went and looking at various articles about it. But basically, this is what a derivative is. And I'm just going to describe it off the top of my head. Let's say that you have a company that wants to sell something, a European company. Let's go and find Europe over here. There it is. Let's see if we can reduce the size of the Earth a little bit so we can get America and Europe in the same picture. All right, okay, done the best I could. Here we have an English company. The English company deals in pounds. They have $1 million worth of gold. They want to sell $1 million worth of gold to a company in New York. And the pound and the dollar may not have the same value when that transaction is made. So you have a seller over here, you have a buyer over here, and you have a pound being worth $2, and the dollar may go up, the dollar may go down. If they do the transaction, the dollar goes up, then basically the buyer loses a little money or makes a little money, and the opposite on the other side. So basically, what the buyer and seller can do is create what they call a currency swap, which is a derivative. What the heck is that? Well, what that is the seller says, I am willing to sell you $1 million worth of gold, where the dollar is worth 1/2 of a pound, and you're willing to buy it. And so a third party comes in there and says, look, I will guarantee that this transaction will be worth $1 equals 50, 1/2 a pound, or 1 pound is worth $2 at the end of the transaction, which is probably going to be in 90 days or 30 days. And you will make me a payment for this guarantee. That payment, let's say $100, that is the nominal value of the currency swap or of the derivative. And if everything goes the way it is and it's worth $2, I just made, if 1 pound is worth $2 in 30 days or 90 days, I, the holder of the derivative, just made $100. If the price of the value of the dollar collapses and the dollar is worth 3 pounds, then I have to take that loss. So I'm figuring out a value that will cover the insurance basically on the value of the dollar. That's what we call a currency swap or a swap derivative. And that's basically how it works. As long as the people involved in the derivative is the buyer, the seller, and the person who owns the derivative, everything is fine. You're not going to value the derivative completely out of control, and there's a reason why the buyer and the seller need a derivative. The problem is that derivatives are sold as if they are stocks. Basically the same problem with the CDOs and the mortgages. And that's because those CDOs are and were swaps. They were derivatives. And as long as the derivative is related to the three parties, the party that owns the derivative, who has an interest in it, the seller and the buyer, derivatives kind of make sense. It's like an insurance policy for the value of the transaction. However, once that derivative gets sold, and there's a fourth party who says, gee, I hope I make that $100, and I hope that the currency changes in such a way that I make money off of this deal, then we have a problem. And that is where the problem started. Actually, the problem started in the 90s. Apparently, the swap started in 1995. And by 1998, had almost pulled down the entire financial system of the world. If it wasn't for a couple of brilliant people, one was the Secretary of the Treasury at the time under Clinton. His name was Rubin. And the head of the Federal Reserve, and then at that point was named Greenspan. Basically, what happened was with these derivatives, with these swaps that might be what they call 200 basis points, 2%, you could tie up a tremendous amount of currency. Even at 200 basis points, even at 2%, $1 billion worth of derivatives, nominal value, ties up $50 billion worth of currency transactions. These people that bought and sold these derivatives started basically making runs at the currency of different countries. So Malaysia was the first, and basically the value of the Malaysia currency, I forgot what it was called, collapsed. Then Indonesia, they collapsed the Indonesian currency. There were runs on currencies throughout Asia. Finally, went to South Korea. Now, South Korea at that time, was the 7th or 8th largest economy in the world. Basically produced about a little less than $1 trillion worth of value. They made a run at the won, which is the South Korean currency, and that run based on derivatives was so bad that in order to defend their currency, the Koreans were within 12 hours of using up all of their financial reserves in hard currency that they had in the world. They would not have been able to do any world trade. It would have collapsed banks in Japan, China, and in Europe, and eventually collapsed the whole economy. The won was rescued by the IMF, the Federal Reserve, and a bunch of other entities. Then they took a run at the Russian ruble. It basically destroyed democracy in Russia and ended up with the takeover by Putin. And they also went after the Mexican peso. And the Mexican peso went down 50%, wiped out most of the middle class in Mexico. Just a disaster, a series of disasters. However, the ultimate disaster was one of those hedge funds that was manipulating these currencies, had tied up so much that when they rescued one of these bailouts, I guess he didn't get it, he ended up losing a few $1 billion. But that few $1 billion represented over $1 trillion of world finances. And the Federal Reserve at that time, this was in the late 90s, had to rescue the long-term hedge fund, give them the $1 billion to cover their losses. Otherwise, they would have had to sell $1 trillion worth of currency. So basically, fast forward to today, before we fast forward, in the year 2000, and I read the article, the report by the Federal Reserve and some other agencies that set up the laws, they had a law that was passed in the year 2000. Unfortunately, that's a black mark as far as I'm concerned on Clinton, his administration, that he allowed this to be passed, basically making these kind of currency swaps, options, and other derivatives, and basically deregulating them to the point where the CFTC, which regulates futures, the SEC, which regulates regulates securities, the banking, I forgot the name of their agency that regulates banks, the Federal Reserve that also regulates banks. Basically, no one is in charge of the unbelievably large derivative business. Derivative business as of 1999, $80 trillion. Basically, today, the value of all the goods and services in the world are only $50 to $60 trillion. So even back then, and nobody knows what the value of these particular derivatives are today. However, if we have a value of derivatives, let's face it, the nominal value of derivatives is worth 50 or 100 times the actual assets that they represent. That's what the problem with the CDO collapse was. The problem with the subprime mortgage collapse was that the derivatives that were being traded actually had a higher value than all of the real estate that and mortgages that they backed up. How is that possible? Nobody knows. What is this value? What does this money represent? It represents pure and utter inflation. Nothing else. Basically, entities, private investment banks, private equity outfits, hedge funds, and so on and so forth are basically printing money outside of all of the central banks of the world, and this has got to stop, or at least it has to be regulated. The reason is because they have already, just with one of these derivatives, and that is CDOs, which are debt obligations, consolidated debt obligations of collateralized debt obligations of mortgages. Basically, that alone collapsed one of these markets, which is the subprime CDO derivatives, to the point where just the 15 major banks that were associated lost $187 billion. These are real losses off the top of their capital, and therefore represent a shrinking of the ability to loan of 20 times that $187 billion, or $3.6 trillion. The Federal Reserve has taken some tremendous actions in order to buy up, or at least collateralize, these CDOs, but they are not looking at the next collapse. And what is this next collapse? Well, basically, we have a situation where the price of gold went from $500 to $1,000 in the space of about a year and a half. Why did it do that? Well, some people say it's because the dollar has gone down. However, the price of gold in terms of euros went from $16 to $23. So it's not even keeping even in value in euros, the currency that's basically taking over from the dollar. So it was just a 20 to 30% increase out of nothing. Out of that 20 to 30% increase last week, there was a basic mini collapse, would drop the price of gold by $100 ounce. And this can happen anywhere. If it does, the derivatives that are based on these commodities have got to drop. And if they're outside of the area of the puts and the calls and so on and so forth, could cause a collapse of the market behind any one of these commodities. Between 2004 and 2006, the nominal value, take into account the value of assets that are tied up, are 50 times its nominal value, from $1 trillion to $6 trillion. We don't know how much is tied up specifically in commodities derivatives that is pushing and forcing up the price of oil to $100 when it's really worth only $60, the price of gold, the price of food, and everything else. This is a disaster waiting to happen, needs to be controlled. My name's Reed Silverne. Name of this show is Fed Pride. Reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker and proud of it. Thank you very, very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And watch on Sundays or Tuesdays.